Hey, I'm Jesse. Let's have a devotion. We've arrived in our study of Exodus at a famous moment, one that's been depicted in numerous movies. If you were a 90s kid like me, you remember the Prince of Egypt. And if you're old school, you know the Ten Commandments. This has been depicted over and over again. I want to give some of the cultural context behind it. Pharaohs have been discovered archaeologically to always have like these symbols of like menacing cobras over their heads, and it's the sign of supposedly divine protection over the pharaoh, the king, and the people of Egypt. By extension, they would attribute divinity to the pharaoh, and these plagues all would hit the Egyptian pantheon right where it hurts, and in a smaller scale way, this battle of the serpents is an ode to that. It's a foreshadowing of that. I mean, to hit them right in the symbol of, their own divine protection with a serpent of God's own miraculous making was to foreshadow everything else that would come through the plagues. Now, you're going to see Jannes and Jambres. They're not named in Exodus, but they are named in 2 Timothy. And so whether by Jewish tradition or archaeological record, these two like sorcerers, a name that is derived, sorcerer is a name that is derived from people who would offer up prayers. There's a sense of divinity attributed to them. And there's archaeological record of their snake charming abilities. That's part of how they attributed divine power to these sorcerers, is that with their ability to control snakes and make snakes do things. These snake charming sorcerers are going to be able to manufacture their own wonders, as probably the best translation of the word here. And when you look at the wonders they were able to, in a darkly way, replicate, they do hit a threshold, and that same threshold is the threshold whereby Satan meets his own limits. All right? He's not just hemmed in by the limitations that God gives him by way of his permission, but he also has limitations to his own power as it is. The only omnipotent is God. The only one who can create life, the only one who can animate is God. And so that same boundary, that same threshold will also apply to the sorcerers of Egypt. Take a look at Exodus chapter 7, verse 8. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "When Pharaoh tells you, perform a miracle, tell Aaron, take your staff and throw it down before Pharaoh. It will become a serpent." So Moses and Aaron went into Pharaoh and did just as the Lord commanded. Aaron threw down his staff before Pharaoh and his officials, and it became a serpent. So this is exactly what God showed Moses he would do individually, and then Moses showed the elders. All right, we've seen that God has confirmed he was going to do this already. All right, and now it's showtime, so to speak, and now it's performed for Moses exactly as was demonstrated for Moses, and then for the elders. Now Aaron is the one who actually throws down the staff, and it becomes a serpent. But then Pharaoh called the wise men and sorcerers the magicians of Egypt, and they also did the same thing by their occult practices. Each one threw down his staff, and it became a serpent. But Aaron's staff swallowed their staffs. However, Pharaoh's heart was hard, and he did not listen to them as the Lord had said. So how did they do this? Well, we know that they were snake charmers, and there's historical record of like cobras, being given this sort of divine connotation in ancient Egyptian culture. But how were they able to do the same thing, these magicians of Egypt? Now, whether it was by sleight of hand or whether it was by illusion, or even if it was a demonic miracle, in either event, we see Aaron's staff that is turned into a serpent consume the serpents that are offered up by these men who are known now in the New Testament as Jannes and Jambres, the magicians, the sorcerers, for Pharaoh. This is what's going to happen in every plague. See that divine symbol of protection of yours? It just got eaten. See that goddess of fertility? She just got overpowered. See your God who presides over livestock? He's evidently impotent. See your goddess Hecate over the frogs? Evidently, the frogs are Yahweh's. And this is not the last time that these guys are going to replicate by occult means the same miracles. Here's 2 Timothy 3:8. Just as Jannes and Jambres resisted Moses, so these also resist the truth. They are men who are corrupt in mind and worthless in regard to the faith. We taught through 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, and Titus verse by verse in a series titled Letters to My Sons. It's available in the JCM library if you're a subscriber, and it's available on our YouTube channel as well. At least the sermons are, and I think the devotions too, maybe. But this is remarkable because now that we're in Exodus, we can come back to this text, this Jannes and Jambres reference, who resist the truth. And they didn't just resist it, they resisted it with miraculous signs and wonders. There are miraculous signs and wonders, whether you believe that Jannes and Jambres accomplished this feat of turning their own staffs into snakes by way of trickery or by some demonic miracle. There are limitations, and it comes up to bite them. All right, pun intended. The snake indeed bites them. And it's even cooler too when you consider the Old Testament origins of the serpent. This in Revelation 12, it's revealed that this ancient serpent who has been deceiving men since the beginning is the devil. That's not revealed until the last book of the Bible, but it's first shown in the beginning of the Bible as clearly like the devil is there, embodied by a serpent who speaks and deceives Adam and Eve. And it's not until the last book of the Bible that it's clearly stated that that's the devil who's been deceiving since the beginning. But even serpents were God's creation. They belong to God. And we could speak more about the anatomy of a serpent and how it may have had legs at one point, but then because of God's curse upon creation, the serpent is the serpent as we know it, that it crawls on its belly as a curse. But what's remarkable is that even so, it's God's. Even the serpent is God's. God would even use the serpent to deliver these same people. Moses would be instructed to lift up a bronze snake, and everybody who looked at it was delivered from the discipline of God on his people as they're bitten by snakes. And a lot of people die because of their disobedience. But if they look up to the bronze snake, they're saved. This is where the caduceus comes from. This is where this is the imagery that Jesus draws upon in the most famous verse of the whole Bible. That just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the desert, so also the Son of Man must be lifted up. And so we look to the serpent lifted up in Exodus, and we are saved from the very thing that afflicts us. We must look it full in the face. And that same way, Jesus himself takes on sin, and he is lifted up. And if we look to him, we are saved. The devil was embodied by a serpent in Genesis, and he is ontologically referred to as a serpent even in Revelation, but even serpents themselves are ultimately gods. Jannes, Jambres, every false teacher, even the Antichrist, who will also work miracles, will ultimately be persuaded of this. They all must confess that Jesus is Lord. I was asked after a sermon a couple of weeks ago by one of our many godly, biblically wise single young men that we have at the Redemption Church. Do you think that people will try to produce a body and claim that it's Jesus's in the last days? And he brings up a credible theory. It could be. It could be. Moreover, I think that not just because I think it's quite possible, but also because Scripture says as much. In the last days, as the heat turns up more and more, you're going to see satanic miracles that dissuade people of the gospel and persuade people of this satanic damning faith. Even a darkly imitation, that's the key word, imitation, of Jesus' ministry. As the Antichrist himself, the beast himself, is slain and then resurrected, and the whole world bears witness to it. And they place their faith in the devil instead of Jesus. And the basis for their faith is that they saw a resurrection. They saw physics defied. They all bear witness to a miracle. They didn't believe Jesus' miracles, but the whole world in the last days will believe this miracle. And so it goes to show about how even miracles aren't always a substantial basis for faith itself. And even miracles can be used to deceive. And according to Scripture, they will be. And if that's the case in Exodus, they were. But watch how they meet their match. I'm going to spoil some of the story for you if you've never been through Exodus before. We go through multiple plagues as the narrative progresses. Here's Exodus 7:21. The fish in the Nile died. The river smelled so bad the Egyptians could not drink water from it. There was blood throughout the land of Egypt. But the magicians of Egypt did the same thing by their occult practices. So Pharaoh's heart was hard, and he would not listen to them, as the Lord said. Does that sound familiar? Because that's in today's main text. However, Pharaoh's heart was hard, and he did not listen to them, as the Lord had said. Now, again, in Exodus 8:6-7, when Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. But the magicians did the same thing by their occult practices and brought frogs up onto the land of Egypt. And then we hit the limitations of evil miracles. In Exodus chapter 8, verse 18, the magicians tried to produce gnats using their occult practices, but they could not. The gnats remained on the people and the animals. This is the finger of God, the magician said to Pharaoh, but Pharaoh's heart was hard, and he would not listen to them, as the Lord had said. There it is again. But look, here's where they hit their limitation. So let's take a catalog of this. Which miracles were the sorcerers or magicians, magi, that's where we get that, they're referred to as like wise men as well. Where do they hit their limit? They can replicate the snake thing. They can replicate the water to blood. They can replicate the frog miracle, but they can't replicate the plague of gnats. Satan cannot create anything, but he has always distorted the things that God has done. God creates something good, Satan creates a distortion of it. So he imitates the ministry of Jesus with the Antichrist. He imitates this miracle of the staff through Jannes and Jambres. He then imitates contorting water to blood. He imitates the miracle of the plague of frogs. But what's distinctive about the plague of gnats? It wasn't just like, and gnats. Rather, these gnats were born from the dust, which was inanimate. And it became gnats, transforming something that is inanimate to something that is animate, which means that it is a miracle of the creation of life. So this is the barrier. This is where the devil's potency ends. He cannot imitate that one. And then the result is that his own followers abandon him. They wouldn't have even named the devil, but they obviously confess God. This is the finger of God. So even these guys, it may look like the devil wins in this passage. It may look like the devil's able to do what God can do, that they're able to do the same thing by their occult practices. It's another reason why your faith should not be based exclusively on miracles. But they hit their limit when it comes to creating life from non-life, because only God can do that. That power rests exclusively with God. So don't let your whole faith be based upon miraculous signs and wonders. The world will finally believe miracles and signs and wonders when the devil does them, just as was the case here in ancient Egypt. But know that the devil has his limits. He's not as powerful as God. The ability to bring life from non-life rests exclusively with God the Father. All of this was according to the foreknowledge of God. It may look like the devil is winning in your life right now. It definitely looked pretty bad for a moment there, but just as Aaron's serpent from the staff would consume the serpents from Jannes and Jambres' staffs, just as every god with a lowercase g of the Egyptian pantheon was humiliated and proven impotent by the plagues of Egypt. And just as ultimately in the book of Revelation, God wins, you trust that he's victorious, that he's sovereign. He's the inventor of the creature we refer to as the serpent. Satan has no such jurisdiction, even if he does ontologically present as a serpent for now. His day is coming. And you want to see a serpent destroyed? Go read Revelation. The ultimate destruction of the ultimate evil serpent comes at the final book of the Bible. It may look like the devil is winning for now. It may even be accompanied by miraculous signs and wonders, be they trickery or physics-defying darkly miracles. But God absolutely wins in the end. You have faith in the dark, Christian.